number of other countries, emirates in the region. And I think also it's interesting, when we talk in an S&P context, we always talk about, trying to understand a relative context in which to, take stock of where we are, where any sovereign emirate company is, but also to look at, those sort of comparatives. And so, there are actually relatively few single A rated sovereigns globally. And of course, they're all comparative. And I think in the way in which we've been looking at strong benchmarks, Singapore's been mentioned for the kind of aspirations that RAK has. If we look at the other single A rated sovereigns globally, it's quite interesting. But to start in the region, we have Sharjah, also single A, but at this stage with a negative outlook, so probably a little more exposed to some of the difficulties facing the region than RAK, which has adapted very well in niches, particularly in manufacturing and services. And just not slightly above Bermuda, Slovakia, and a notch below at single A minus Malta and Lithuania. And I picked those up because also they tend to be smaller countries which are either city-states or have niches. And so quite interesting to sort of get a flavor of that international benchmark. But I think now to really sort of launch into the theme of this session, which is very much to sort of explore what is it that makes RAK tick. What are the fundamentals that have got us to where we are today, and to give some sort of insights into that success story. Perhaps, Rami, you'd like to kick off with your thoughts.
Sure. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Well, actually, just to take you through the value chain of all of this, one has to keep in mind that the way we operate is with laser focus, but that means several aspects that we have to always keep in mind. And with keeping Ras Al Khaimah on the high-level rating, it's all about several factors in terms of how we keep the sustainability of our current revenues and how we also generate new income that is really the door opening to us attracting FDI, attracting investors from all over the world, as well as how we better service our current portfolio of customers. So those are really our main two mandates, but that means a lot of things that we need to put together. Our focus at the Investment Authority and in the free zones is all about really two diversified sectors within themselves, which is the manufacturing sector, and more so as well with a large population of SMEs using Ras Al Khaimah as their hub. So it's how we continue to understand those businesses and what type of services that we provide to those businesses in a customized fashion and manner. We are well diversified in terms of the different type of industries, so we're not as volatile when it comes to the economic situation. We always keep in mind as a strategic objective to be on a one-to-one basis with our customers that allows us to understand them and to understand the mechanics of what's happening in the environment, what's happening in their industry, but with one underlying theme, which is Ras Al Khaimah has to always be a cost-effective destination, and working with all of our government entities to make sure that that mandate is set across all of our government entities ensures that we're all offering the same value proposition. It's the right ecosystem or the wrong ecosystem. People always look at the cost effectiveness of running and operating their organizations, and that's how we feel that we're flexible enough, we're agile enough, we're large enough to actually use economies of scale to keep giving that cost effective value to any investor that comes to Ras Al Khaimah. That secures our current revenue and that attracts new FDI and keeps us sustainable.
Okay, thank you.
For businesses to Ras Al Khaimah. Also, we went under review of all economic laws that we have at Ras Al Khaimah. I think almost last month we had almost 6 decrees issued by His Highness to make sure that we provide also the service to our investors and also to make the journey as easy as they expect. And this is very important also from the side that Rami also and the Iraq Investment Authority. So we are working hand in hand to provide and to facilitate all what's needed as better environment in Ras Al Khaimah. And that's one of the things that we are working hard together hand in hand.
If I can add, even Doctor is also responsible, and he's leading an initiative and an executive committee on a government level where His Highness mandate has given the doctor and the group of the committee to ensure that we are always, whatever rules, regulations, policies that happen on a government level, they are well thought out and studied before they are implemented on the investor or on the current clientele base or investors that we have in Ras Al Khaimah, and the doctor is leading that initiative.
Yeah, that's another committee, the Economic Committee at the Executive Council. We already conducted studies about the Ras Al Khaimah economies and or even the fees, the charges that we have, the regulation and all this stuff. And we came up almost with 21 recommendations that will have, I think, positive impact also on Ras Al Khaimah economy. And this will be in the next, before the end of this month, hopefully, that this will be issued and released.
So our initiatives really are always about trying to find the offer as a package to the investor, and to our current portfolio, which means that we're always enhancing our services, we're always enhancing the ecosystem and the environment. This takes time, but at least we're committed and we're determined to make sure that this is a strategic objectives within each one of the government entities' strategic objectives. And we work together and collaborate to make sure that we're building it together.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think it's clear that, RAK has further potential to carve out quite a unique kind of niche in a sort of a services and manufacturing context, which can almost be a role model for the region. I mean, it's in a sense the free zone model, which is obviously very important to RAK, but also has been such a huge success throughout the UAE. One of the, if you like, the byproducts of its success has been at times a challenge to actually be able to get a very accurate take on simply how successful it has been in terms of economic flow. We often sort of talk about how well the UAE has been resilient to the global downturn over the last 6 years, and if you like, some disconnects between the amount of economic cash flow coming through the Emirates against what we believe the economic measured GDP activity to be. And I think, even at S&P, where we're kind of restricted to dealing with validated government data, we do accept that the free zones being tax-free do attract, for all the right reasons, businesses which, even if based here, have international activities and are conducting, if you like, third country activities. So there, if you like, there is an economic activity domiciled in the UAE's free zones for all the right reasons, which does have a sort of a secondary economic benefit, but we're not necessarily capturing at a government statistics level sort of the headline value of that. So that's again, that's also an important opportunity, we think, going forward. But perhaps to jump to, I guess, it's true whenever we have all these sorts of conferences and forums and we talk about everything that's going well and we've got a pipeline of opportunities and projects, but we always get to a point where we say, okay, where's the money? Where are the investors? This is all great, but who's going to be investing and what kind of, and so just give us a flavor of the profile of investors, because at sort of one level we have, if you like, retail real estate investors, but obviously more importantly, what makes the RAK economy tick is at an industrial level. So give us a flavor of the whole investor spectrum and what kind of feedback are they giving as to what they like about RAK and what would they like to see more of?
Right. In my position, I'm responsible for the Emirates Sovereign Rating, and I deal with the rating agencies.
Yes.
And given that, what I do naturally is to look at fundamentals. So I don't really look at industry sectors.
Yeah.
I look at the Emirates fundamentals, and from that, it's clear to see that one of the main reasons has to be for investors to come here is because the fundamentals here are solid. And when I talk about fundamentals, the fundamentals has three components. There's obviously political and social stability, lack of political stability, lack of policy predictability. Same goes for the US. People are now guessing what kind of economic policies can we expect in the incoming administration. So here we don't have that. There's a track record, and that's very important, a well-established track record of political and social stability, which is, again, is a rare commodity nowadays, especially if you look around the region. The second element is that there is policy stability and predictability. And as you know, for investors of all kinds, wherever they come from, and in whatever industry they participate in, policy stability and predictability is fundamental. Because if they don't have that, then they can't make investment decisions. So here, policy making is informed by a long-term strategic vision, which has three mutually reinforcing principles. There is the openness to foreign investment, as we heard from His Highness Sheikh Saud in his opening remarks. That's one of the core principles, openness to foreign investment. There is the drive for economic diversification, and there's a drive for modernization. So these three mutually reinforcing components inform policy making and the country's long-term vision. And that's in place and has been in place. And this in turn, this combined with political stability allows macroeconomic stability. Fiscal deficits, which are rising, and has a rising debt ratio as well. Ras Al Khaimah has, again, an established track record of fiscal surpluses. Ras Al Khaimah's budget has been in surplus every year since 2009. It has a very low and declining debt ratio. And when the macroeconomy is stable and there are no risks and no imbalances, that again is an incentive for investors to look at this place and to come in here. One final element, an important element, is the operating environment. Obviously, there is the free trade zones, but even abstracting from the free trade zones, it's very, very important that there is a supportive legal environment and a light and easily maneuverable administrative burden. And many of you would be familiar with the World Bank's Doing Business study, which they conduct every year, and in this study they rank 189 countries on factors. Companies from lesser developed parts of the world, they're attracted here by political and social stability and good quality infrastructure. So all kinds of companies from many different countries find this an attractive location. And in every part of the economy. You mentioned, it was mentioned in previous presentations that one of our key strengths is economic diversification. Stuart, you mentioned in your opening remarks Bermuda, which is rated one notch higher than Ras Al Khaimah. Bermuda, however, the financial services industry is close to 90% of GDP. So that means that in itself is an inherent risk.
Sure.
When your economy is so concentrated. So Bermuda is doing well now, but when 90% of GDP is one sector, that's not a desirable situation to be in.
Maybe let's explore that diversification piece a little more, Remy. And I mean, I'm conscious that His Highness talked about and alluded to quite substantially people skills, you know, and the potential for where that can lead, whether it's the technology route with IP or just simply, you know, sort of a whole sort of service proposition. I mean, how do you sort of see the RAK economy in a diversified context? Are there specific sector targets, and to what extent does skills and education play a part of that?
Well, definitely, just to give you an idea, in our free zones and in the investment authority today, we have investors and companies from 100 different countries focusing on really 50 different industry sectors. I would call it general global logistics or general global trading industry, because that's what they use Ras Al Khaimah for, a hub. And one of the roles, and linking it to education, obviously, is we've also moved very strongly in capitalizing on Ras Al Khaimah's already existing environment for education, which is one of His Highness's passion and mandate to us to diversify into the education field by creating an academic zone that really is there to attract all types of universities and educational institutions to be based out of Ras Al Khaimah, from distant learning to online learning to full-fledged universities. And currently today we're even working on bringing in very renowned institutions so that they can offer undergrad, postgrad, master's and PhD programs, but at the same time executive learning programs. So creating Ras Al Khaimah as a hub for an executive learning center. So that diversification all happens, but with the people's education, and the people are the most important, comes one factor which I consider Ras Al Khaimah to be a leader in, which is our ability to really keep innovating and creating new products or services. The IFC courts, where we are introducing to our customers in all of Ras Al Khaimah the opportunity to use common law in English and register with the DIFC, and that will be enforced in the Ras Al Khaimah courts, to use the independent arbitration system in DIFC. So it gives international companies that clarity and that confidence in a judicial system to secure their contracts or business sustainability. So those are the innovative ideas that we keep coming up with. We have a very, very strong initiative, which is our offshore jurisdiction in Ras Al Khaimah, which is called RAKFIF, and that's taking its shape as we speak. It's very strong with over 20,000 customers. So there's a lot of innovation in terms of products and registration and who they can bring on board. And that's another innovation that the Ras Al Khaimah team has come up with. So we're continuously reinventing. And one important thing that was mentioned earlier today is, all this being said and done, is how that operating ecosystem works together. Accessibility. How can we get our clients, whether they're international, global, or regional, to access our services or becoming part of the Ras Al Khaimah family, but through automation and through registration and licensing and services offered on a web-based platform that doesn't necessarily have them to come here to do the services.
It's interesting. I mean, there's been such a heavy focus in the Gulf, certainly in the last 10, 15 years, on building out infrastructure. And one could almost argue that, there's a little bit of an imbalance between the focus on infrastructure and that on skills and education. When you look at sort of, if you like, the balance of spend. I mean, from a government policy point of view, Doctor, I mean, how do you sort of see the government's commitment to educational institutions, and also just simply the challenge we do have in the Gulf states of just simply manpower and numbers? I mean, Singapore, for example, does have sort of this sort of wealth of just numbers, graduates, larger population. I mean, here in the Gulf, we obviously have a different profile of population, so trying to sort of build some sort of bake in that resource and expertise.
Yeah, I guess, as Rami said, I think one of the areas also for government to concentrate on technology and education on one side, and having that environment to attract schools from different countries to be located here, because as we're getting also more investors coming with their families, as Ras Khaimah become not just for, it's a life. It's a life that includes you do have to do business, education for your kids, enjoyment and entertainment and all this stuff. So that's attract more business to come, and also put more, I think, requirement for the government to have that proper infrastructure available when it's needed. And this area, Al-Hamra, more nationals are here, why more businesses here, more manufacturing in this area. So I think this is given more attention also. And also, you actually, when we go as representing government and business delegates, also we are driven by this trend that we talk with with these countries with regard to sustainability, education, technology, and so forth. Why? Because we are driven by the vision that we need these kind of things to be located and based in Ras Al Khaimah. As we're bringing more people, more investors come, education must be there.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's an effort also built in Ras Al Khaimah with the hand of the Iraq Investment Authority and Free Zone.
I just wanted to add, when it comes to the education, even the same quality of high educational institutions that are in other parts of the world or in neighboring Emirates, they do come here but are able to provide a more cost-effective tuition fee or fees to the population, to the students, to the families, because we are offering them incentives that allow them to keep their operating costs and their cost of running the business much lower than anywhere else. So that's the mandate and one of our requests from these schools, and one of our requirements is that because we feel that we're giving something to them in order for them to give something back to the community, and that is to provide the same level of high education to everybody in Ras Al Khaimah. And I think in the last year we've been able to attract 3 different schools in terms of K to 12, and we're attracting some of the larger universities, brand names that are very well renowned in Europe to be setting up here to do their R&D, to do their executive training programs and undergrad and master's programs, which we'll be talking about and launching and mentioning very soon, hopefully. So this is a mandate. We know that when more investors come in, when companies come and set up in Ras Al Khaimah, they want their families to be around. They have their staff, they have their families. So it's part of our contribution to building the ecosystem and providing that those amenities, schooling, healthcare, and other kinds of services are in the same environment. So it becomes sort of what you would call a one-stop shop boutique destination.
So that's great insight. I think one of the and it's competing with other emerging markets, and one of the challenges for emerging markets today, certainly in a sort of a post-Brexit, post-Trump presidency, is emerging markets are facing general headwinds. And one of the things that S&P we look at quite closely and as an important theme is infrastructure and project finance. And the pipelines are huge. In the Middle East alone, anything between 1 and 2 trillion, depending on what you exclude. But let's say core industrial, because there's a strong potential Islamic finance component there, that's another 1.5 trillion. Africa's competing. There's just huge competition for resources. And what makes it all sort of, to the extent we're looking for international capital, European and American investors are now about to be wooed very significantly by the US, which needs to replace aging infrastructure built just after World War II. And so there's this intense global competition for capital. So from the investor perspective, what do you hear from investors as they're kind of looking at, say, a RAK proposition or even a GCC proposition? Are they assessing, say, RAK or the Gulf for the first time?
I mean, I primarily deal with fixed income investors, being responsible for the rating. But again, Ras Al Khaimah and the United Arab Emirates stands out in the emerging markets in general, but especially in the region with the political and social stability that we have here. And that in itself is a big attraction. There are a lot of countries in the region suffering turbulence of one sort or another, and now even in the developed economy. Resources, the government, so it is not, it does not need to borrow For example, other countries in the region, you see them one after another accessing the international capital market.
Yeah.
And not even for infrastructure development, but to finance budget deficits. Oman, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, etc. We don't have that problem here. The budget is in surplus. And I think here we have a different kind of problem. Here we need to, the government has a nice problem to have, which is to prioritize the infrastructure needs.
Yeah.
The funds are available, so this competition for capital that you refer to that is now emerging I think is much less likely to affect Ras Al Khaimah than either many GCC countries or other emerging market countries where the macroeconomic fundamentals and especially the fiscal and debt position are not as solid as what we have here.
Okay, well, maybe that leads quite nicely to expansion of the government sector. But so here in Iraq, I mean, what's the desirable sort of shape of that in terms of the role of government and its GREs as, if you like, policy leaders, underwriters, investors, but also the desire to sort of have a strong private sector, the way in which there would be partnerships, future thoughts on privatization. I mean, we could spend an hour on the subject alone, but it seems to me that RAK again has quite a sort of a strong opportunity to trailblaze in this respect and set a unique role model as to how public and private sector can sort of develop, in an optimal sense. Why don't you start? Yes.
I guess today for government department, they must understand, and we understand that actually, that we have changed our role and regulations and interact with the business to make the life is easy. In terms of delivery, in terms of quality, and so forth. And we are pushing the people, even the people who work in the department, to the KPI, business-oriented mentality, and so forth. And that's very important for government. Why? That will give the people the mentality that they need to respond quickly to the private sector needs, actually, and interact with them and make the life easy. And for that, and so I think the future of any government to push the government to work as private sector terms, deliver in terms of quality of service delivered, in terms of cost. Actually, today we are pushing toward reducing the fees and the charges and so forth. Why? Because we believe if we reduce, more investment will come. Not the idea that making the life hard for the current businesses. That's unfair. It's very important. Transparency of regulation is very important for us. So that's I think the trend that coming now and through all departments, and also the vision of His Highness, making sure that all government departments deliver the proper service in a quick way, and also in fair pricing with regard to the value of service that delivered. And this is very important. I think this is very key important issue in Ras Al Khaimah. And myself in the economic department, I am pushing people toward business, toward easing the life for the businesses. And I think many projects that we are working in, inshallah, in the future, will go toward this trend.
I think just to support that, as a government entity, working with the private sector is where they will start to contribute to some of the amenities that we would have predominantly been building before, such as schools or a hospital, or even as far as going to labor accommodation, blue collar, white collar, or even supermarkets or malls, and we are opening up our master planning where these private investors can come into our zones, and we would work with them so they would support in building those infrastructure capabilities or amenities to support the greater community. So that's our contribution in terms of how we are starting to work with the private sector, where they can contribute also and it'll become a win-win where we're all developing for creating that environment and the ecosystem for SMEs or industry to thrive. Otherwise, if that load would be put on a government entity by itself, it would take longer. It would be a heavier burden on our finances and our capexes. But this is the way that we also are trying to spread the economy to the private investor and the private sector.
The and technology side, and a common theme which cropped up in terms of challenges they found, and it was very much pan-GCC, so not picking out any one particular sort of country or emirate, but they found that often they thought there was insufficient government co-investment for the more innovative greenfield, riskier style of startups and projects. But they also found suddenly when certain themes and subsectors started going very well, they found they were having to compete with government startups. Yeah. And so this is a very tricky balance, but do you sort of see, again, that sort of flavor coming through? I can understand the concern.
The leadership here has a very strong focus on efficiency in general. So there may come a day when they will decide to partially privatize certain state-owned enterprises, not because they need the cash and not because of some ideological conviction, but simply to use as a device to improve efficiency.
Yeah.
I think that's quite possible because we have these large state-owned enterprises and they're doing well, but again, my sense, and this is only my private opinion, that there's a very strong focus on efficiency and they're always on the lookout for ways to improve efficiency across the state sector. And that's where I think that's one way in which privatization may come up in the future.
But from a laser focus, more act like a landlord, whether it's a leasehold or a freehold, but not involved, and give the opportunity to the private sector to thrive. And that's really the boutique style environment that we have here in terms of allowing the SMEs to thrive here, allowing industry to thrive here. If we were going to compete with them, then that would actually not be against. It wouldn't be a fair platform for attracting that FDI or a ecosystem for SMEs to thrive here in Ras Al Khaimah. So our value proposition would be very well eroded then. You can't do it all.
No.
You can't.
Not indeed. And in a sense, you talked earlier about sort of Dubai as being obviously ranking very strongly as sort of a global competitiveness, ease of doing business point of view. And I think, RAK actually differentiates very elegantly from, sort of a Dubai model, both in terms of sort of physical separation, but also just clearly in terms of scale, cost base, complexity, and all of those things. Just watching the time, I think this is probably a good juncture to pass over to the audience for any questions of our panel, anything which specifically we've discussed or anything else relating to that. There are microphones.
Supporting the SMEs basically to get the financial assistance from banks, especially at this particular situation. Thank you.
So that's a question around, and thank you for the question, and not uncommon to RAK. SME financing it's a global challenge.
Well, I can start by saying that yes, all SMEs have three main criteria, I would think, which would be access to funding, access to customers, is to work with the financial institutions so that we can at least expose to them what are the kind of industries and the SMEs and their portfolios, and knowing more about basically promoting them to these financial institutions. Of course, each financial institution obviously would have its own criteria, but we want to collaborate with the strength of the amount of SMEs that we have and work with specified banks to start opening that kind of value proposition to SMEs. This is something new for us. We are understanding that now with the economic situation that they need funding. So there's going to be some kind of regulations put in place for our SME offering that we're developing right now, and where they can access funds. But then at the end of the day, it depends on the feasibility and how they would convince the fund provider with the viability of their business. So there's only so much we can do in that area until we get to a mass where we can actually start evaluating the SMEs and helping them out in terms terms of contributions, but most likely it wouldn't be, we don't act as an angel investor or venture capitalist. We're more of the license provider, and we give them the breaks and the services at different costs and at different packages to help them and support them where else they would have had to pay premium for that. So these are things that we're working on right now to package and structure special incentives for the SMEs that are in Ras Al Khaimah, in our free zones.
Okay.
But it's in the making, these are some of the points that we would put in that package deals.
Okay. I mean, I know we've got an SME session coming up later in the program, and I can assure you that, SME, if you like, financing is one of sort of the number one challenges for most ministries of economy in the region. I know it's true at sort of a federal level in the UAE. I know from our own perspective, the conversations we have with the Saudi Ministry of Economy, it's their number one agenda issue is simply empowering SMEs and ensuring that the banks don't focus on what they're comfortable with, which is their larger exposures where they have a wealth of security and information, but simply that large mass of SMEs which do ultimately power economic growth and diversity and sustainability. Any more questions?
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Muhammad Maqsood. I'm facing sometime problem in free zone when we want to renewals or something, so it take a long time, and sometimes there is a difference of fees is coming up. Thank you.
Well, we live in a an ever-changing world, and improving the efficiencies of the services that we give, and we will be communicating to our clients. But that happens in any free zone and anywhere that you go. Sometimes you experience delays, sometimes, but what we want to ensure is that we're putting in standard operating procedures and new, more customer-centric processes for dealing, especially with renewals of licenses. This is my mandate, obviously, to make sure that, that we have a continual improvement program, and that will be shortly exposed. But when it comes to the fees that you're talking about, sometimes in in an environment, there are regulations that are imposed by external government entities that are part of the federal mandate or part of the local government mandate that needs to be in place, which were not in place before. So what we're trying to do is to regulate the business and introduce those fees as gradually as possible. Such as deposits on visas and things that are imposed on us from the regulatory bodies, the other government entities. But we are not implementing them ASAP, so they do come about. We give a time frame for our customers to adapt to this new fee before it's implemented. But I'm not sure about your specific situation, but these are the things that we have to gradually ensure that they're not implemented on our clients immediately. And I mentioned earlier on, one of the committees that we're on the Executive Council is that before any, now which was newly established, that before any new government fee is imposed on our customers in all of Ras Al Khaimah, that it's well thought out, it's studied, it's approved by the executive committee, and we make recommendations whether this is necessary to implement on the companies in Ras Al Khaimah immediately, and work with the government bodies to make sure that they understand that whether this is required or not. So this is a new initiative where we know that that's happening.
Okay. Time for one more question, just here.
My company, Arab Business Center, we are in the free zone. Just a simple question. The coming year, we are hearing about the value-added tax going to be implemented. Apart from that, it's a matter of concern for overseas investors where there is anything in the thought process of introducing income tax for the investors. We appreciate having comments on this. Thank you.
About whether this income tax will be imposed in the free zones or not. But this is on a federal level, and this has not been communicated to any of the free zones as of yet. So as far as we're concerned, it's business as usual. Free zones value proposition was that there'll be no income tax, no corporate tax until today. So right now we are working very closely with the legal firms and with the government bodies to ensure that they keep us informed of the regulations when and as they come out. But I'm sure that there will be, these are things that would not be imposed immediately, but I wouldn't be able to help you in that area. It's a federal level, and free zones till now is business as usual. Our value proposition still holds. It's a tax-free environment in the free zone.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think maybe just to close, are there any opportunities for any closing comments? Maybe that's something we haven't touched on this morning.
Just as Rami said, I think no plans for corporate tax or income tax in the near future. And this is what we know. And also, if it comes, it will not go direct to the free zones because these have certain setups. So don't worry about this. We would like to thank all people here for coming and for accepting the invitation to come to Ras Al Khaimah, and also to open the discussion and the channel to be located one day, your business located in Ras Al Khaimah. We wish all the people here the best and enjoyable stay in Ras Al Khaimah and exploring Ras Al Khaimah also at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, gentlemen. I think that's been a sort of a great but short insight into kind of capturing aspects of the sort of the policy agenda for RAK, what's gone well, where the focus is, and I think we get a sense that this is an emirate which is carving out a very attractive niche for itself, but has great potential to sort of set a great example as well as to how it can be done. So on that note.